Sometimes those we've wronged become our only hope for salvation. Sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected place. Cole Radley made his fortune buying New Mexico ranch land and tearing down everything his late father once built. When a deal goes bad, he's tied to a tree in the desert sun, left for dead. Then 6 stray dogs appear, the same ones he chased away days before. They don't attack, they free him. They lead him on a journey across forgotten land, past abandoned homes and old graves, telling stories he never knew. These dogs guard something connected to his father's past. What secret lies buried here, and why would they save a man who showed them only cruelty? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cole Radley's office in Santa Fe occupied the top floor of a glass tower that caught the desert sun each morning like a blade. From his window, he could see the Sangre de Cristo mountains rising purple against the horizon, but he rarely looked. Mountains were just obstacles to development, ancient stone that complicated surveys and drove up costs. Everything in Cole's world had a price, and if something couldn't be priced, it didn't matter. He was 43 years old and looked 10 years younger. The kind of preservation that comes from personal trainers, careful diet and a life insulated from physical labor. His hands were smooth, his clothes tailored, his hair professionally styled with just enough gray at the temples to suggest gravitas without age. People often said he didn't look like a rancher, and they were right. Cole Radley wasn't a rancher. He was a developer who happened to trade in ranch land. The business model was simple and profitable. He identified struggling ranch properties across New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado, places where families had worked the land for generations but couldn't compete with corporate agriculture or sustain themselves through drought years. He made generous offers, always above market value, always with kind words about preserving legacy. Then once the papers were signed and the family's gone, he subdivided, rezoned and sold to whoever would pay top dollar. Sometimes that meant luxury developments, sometimes corporate farms, sometimes mining interests. Cole didn't care much about the details. That's what his partner Raymond Voss handled. Raymond was the closer, the man who smoothed over complications and made reluctant sellers see reason. He had a talent for finding pressure points, a struggling medical bill here, a child's college tuition there, and applying just enough weight. Nothing illegal, Raymond always insisted. Just good business. Cole had learned this business from the ground up, though not in the way his father had hoped. Thomas Radley had been a genuine rancher, the old-fashioned kind, who knew every inch of his land and every family who worked it. He'd built the Radley Ranch into something modestly successful, but more importantly, into something meaningful. People respected Thomas Radley. They brought him their problems, trusted his counsel, showed up at his door with pies and news and requests for advice. His ranch employed 15 families directly and supported dozens more through partnerships and shared resources. Cole remembered those days with the peculiar distance of someone recalling a foreign country. He'd grown up in the saddle, learning to rope and brand, helping with calving season, riding fence lines with his father, while Thomas talked about soil composition and water tables and the responsibility of stewardship. "We don't own this land, son," his father would say. "We're just taking care of it for the next generation." That philosophy died with Cole's mother. Sarah Radley had been thrown from a horse when Cole was 12 years old. A freak accident. The horse spooked at a snake, stumbled in a gopher hole, went down hard. She broke her neck in the fall, dead before the ambulance could navigate the 20 miles of dirt roads to reach them. Cole still remembered his father's face that day, the way Thomas had held Sarah's hand long after the paramedics gently suggested he step back. The way his father's whole body seemed to collapse inward, like a building losing its support beams. Thomas tried to keep going, tried to maintain the ranch and raise Cole alone, but something fundamental had broken. The joy went out of the work. The purpose dimmed. He became mechanical, going through motions, his eyes always somewhere else. Cole watched his father fade for years, and in watching he learned an important lesson. Love was a liability. Attachment meant vulnerability. Caring about people and places just gave the world leverage to hurt you. By the time Cole left for college, business school at UT Austin, his father's money paying tuition, he'd already decided his future. He wouldn't be a rancher. He wouldn't tie his life to dirt and cattle and the endless grinding uncertainty of weather and markets. He'd learn how to turn land into money, how to extract value and move on before anything could take root. His father accepted this with quiet disappointment. They spoke less and less over the years. Cole visited rarely, always with excuses about meetings and obligations. Thomas never complained, never pushed, just looked at his son with sad, knowing eyes that made Cole angry in ways he couldn't articulate. When Thomas Radley died 5 years ago, heart attack in his sleep, mercifully quick, Cole inherited everything. The ranch, the land, the house, and a worn leather ledger his father had apparently wanted him to have. The lawyer handed it over at the reading of the will with a note, "So you'll understand what mattered." Cole never opened it. The ledger sat in a box in his storage unit, along with other items from his father's house that he couldn't quite throw away, but didn't want to examine. Instead, he'd sold the ranch whole to a corporate farm operation, pocketed the money, and used it as seed capital for his development business. Within a year, he'd flipped 3 properties. Within 3, he was wealthy. Within 5, he'd become one of the most successful land developers in the Southwest. He told himself he'd honored his father's legacy by turning the ranch into something profitable. He told himself Thomas would have wanted him to be successful. He told himself a lot of things. Raymond Voss became his partner in year 2. They'd met at a real estate convention in Denver, hit it off immediately over drinks. Raymond was older, 50s, with silver hair and a salesman's easy charm. He claimed to have worked in ranch management and understood the industry from the inside. He knew which properties were vulnerable, which families were desperate, which local officials could be persuaded to smooth over zoning issues. Raymond handled the complicated negotiations while Cole managed the financial side and maintained the public face of the business. It worked beautifully. The Mesa Verde property came to their attention 6 months ago. 15,000 acres of high desert land south of Albuquerque, technically part of a larger parcel that had been subdivided decades earlier. On paper, it was worthless. Scrub brush, rocky soil, no water rights to speak of. Too remote for easy development. But Raymond insisted there was opportunity. Recent mineral surveys suggested deposits that mining companies might pay for. All they needed to do was acquire it cheaply, sit on it for a year or 2, then flip it when the mining interests came calling. The current owners were a scattered group of holdouts, families with deed claims going back 30 or 40 years, most not even living on the property anymore. Raymond said it would be easy. A few meetings, some generous offers, problem solved. Cole signed off on the preliminary purchase agreements and authorized Raymond to begin negotiations. 3 days ago, Cole decided to drive down and see the property himself. He rarely did site visits anymore, that was Raymond's domain, but something made him curious. Maybe it was the unusually low purchase price. Maybe it was the odd way Raymond had deflected his questions about the property's history. Maybe it was just boredom. Either way, he got in his Range Rover and made the drive. The land was exactly as unremarkable as described. Desert scrub stretching to low mesas, dotted with juniper and sage, baked hard under the late summer sun. He'd parked near an old barbed wire fence and walked out a few hundred yards, trying to see whatever Raymond saw. Nothing but emptiness. Hot, useless emptiness. That's when he saw the dogs. 6 of them, mangy and lean, watching him from a slight rise about 50 yards off. Mixed breeds, part shepherd, part lab, part coyote for all he knew. Their coats were dusty and matted, their ribs showing through. Reservation dogs, probably, or strays that had gone feral. They didn't approach, just stood there with an intensity that made Cole uncomfortable. He'd picked up a few rocks and thrown them, shouting until they scattered. Vermin. The land was full of them. Coyotes, feral dogs, rattlesnakes. One more reason it was worthless, as anything but a mineral extraction site. Let someone dig it up, pull out whatever value existed and move on. That was the smart play. Cole drove back to Santa Fe, satisfied the property was exactly what he'd paid for, nothing much. He'd left Raymond to finalize arrangements with the last few holdouts and planned to sign the final papers this week. Then they'd shop it to mining companies and wait for the bidding war. Simple, clean, profitable. He'd been working in his office yesterday when Raymond called with news. There was a complication. 3 of the holdouts wanted to meet in person on the property to discuss terms before signing. They wouldn't come to Santa Fe, wouldn't meet in town. They insisted on the land itself, claimed it was tradition for important decisions. Raymond suggested Cole should go, show respect, close the deal personally. It would be good optics, Cole agreed. He was good at the personal touch when needed. Good at looking people in the eye and making them feel heard right before he took everything they had. He'd done it dozens of times. These holdouts would be no different, so he'd driven back down that morning, following Raymond's directions to a spot near the eastern boundary of the property. An old cottonwood tree marked the meeting place, standing alone in the desert like a monument. Cole arrived early, parked in the shade, and waited. The 3 men who met him there were weathered and lean, probably in their 60s, wearing work clothes and carrying themselves with the quiet dignity of people who'd spent their lives doing hard things. They shook his hand, introduced themselves, Martinez, Santos, Rivera, and began asking questions about his plans for the land. Cole gave them the standard pitch. Fair compensation, opportunity to move forward. The land wasn't producing anything anyway. Better to accept a generous offer now than watch the property continue to decline in value. He used his sincere voice, his respectful tone, the one that suggested he understood their attachment, while gently implying they were being impractical. That's when Martinez looked at him with eyes that held something Cole couldn't quite identify. Recognition, maybe, or judgment. "You're Thomas Radley's boy," Martinez said. It wasn't a question. Cole nodded slowly. "I am. Did you know my father?" The 3 men exchanged looks. Santos spoke next. "We worked for him. Long time ago. Before you were born. Your father was a good man." "He was," Cole agreed, sensing the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. Rivera stepped closer. "He would be ashamed of what you've become." The words hit Cole like a slap. He bristled, started to respond with something cutting, but Martinez held up a hand. "We know what you do, Mr. Radley. We know about the families you've moved off their land. We know about the promises broken and the history erased. We know—" He paused, his voice hardening. "We know what you did to your father's ranch." Cole's professional mask slipped. "That's none of your business. We're here to discuss this property, not—" "This property," Santos interrupted, "is your father's business. Was his heart, in fact. Did your partner mention that? Did he tell you what this land meant?" Cole felt suddenly cold despite the heat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No," Rivera said quietly. "You don't, and that's the problem." What happened next came fast. Santos stepped to the side, blocking Cole's path to his car. Martinez moved behind him. Rivera produced a length of rope. Cole tried to fight, tried to talk his way out, but these were men who'd spent their lives working with animals and stubborn machinery. They were strong in the way of people who'd earned every muscle through necessity. Within minutes, Cole was sitting with his back against the cottonwood, his wrists bound behind the tree, his ankles tied. Not tight enough to cut off circulation, but secure enough that he couldn't work free. Rivera placed a single bottle of water in the dirt beside him, just within reach if he stretched. "What the hell are you doing?" Cole demanded, his voice cracking with fury and rising fear. "This is kidnapping, assault. You'll go to prison." Martinez knelt down to Cole's eye level. "Maybe. Or maybe we're just giving you what your father would have wanted, a chance to learn. You can't just leave me here." "That's exactly what we're going to do," Santos said. "You wanted this land. Now it gets to teach you what you need to know." They walked to their truck, an old Ford that looked older than Cole. Rivera turned back once. "Your father loved this place more than anything except your mother and you. He built something here that mattered. If you're half the man he hoped you'd be, you'll understand before it's too late." Then they were gone, dust trail disappearing down the dirt road, engine sound fading to silence. Cole sat there in shock, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone would notice he was missing. Raymond would call. His secretary would wonder. They'd track his phone, except his phone was in his Range Rover, parked 30 yards away, locked. He could see it from here, utterly unreachable. The sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down. Cole pulled at the ropes until his wrists burned, but they held firm. He shouted for help until his throat ached, but the desert swallowed his voice. Hours passed. The water bottle sat in the dirt beside him, taunting him with how desperately he'd need it soon. By late afternoon, Cole's anger had given way to fear. By evening, fear was giving way to desperation. The sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and Cole realized he might actually die here. Exposure, dehydration, maybe predators after dark. His body would be found days or weeks from now, if ever. Another mysterious death in the New Mexico desert. That's when he saw them again. The 6 dogs appeared as the last light faded, materializing from the scrub like ghosts. They approached slowly, deliberately, forming a loose circle around him and the tree. Cole's heart hammered. Stories of feral dogs killing people flashed through his mind. He pulled uselessly at the ropes, making himself small against the tree trunk, but they didn't attack. They sat, they watched. 6 pairs of eyes catching the dying light, steady and patient, and somehow aware in a way that made Cole's skin prickle. The largest, a shepherd mix with one torn ear, tilted its head and held Cole's gaze. Then it stood, walked forward, and began chewing at the rope around Cole's wrists. The first hour after the men left, Cole cycled through every emotion he knew. Rage burned hottest. How dare they? Who did they think they were? He'd have them arrested. He'd sue them into the ground. He'd make them pay. He twisted against the ropes until his wrists bled, leaving dark stains on the rough bark of the cottonwood. He screamed threats into the empty desert until his voice went hoarse. The second hour brought bargaining with himself. Someone would come. Raymond would notice he missed their check-in call. His secretary would worry when he didn't return by evening. The holdouts were just trying to scare him, make a point. They'd come back, or they'd send someone. This was New Mexico, not the moon. People didn't just disappear, except they did. Cole knew that. He'd read the stories, the statistics about how many people went missing in the Southwest every year. Hikers who wandered off trail, travelers who broke down on remote roads. The desert was beautiful and brutal, and it kept its secrets. By the third hour, as the sun reached its zenith and the heat became a physical weight pressing down on him, fear began its slow crawl up Cole's spine. The water bottle sat 6 inches from his right hand, just far enough that his stretched fingers couldn't quite reach it. He could see condensation beading on the plastic. His mouth felt like sandpaper. His lips were already cracking. He tried to think practically. Survival training he'd never bothered to learn. He'd always been the guy in the air-conditioned vehicle, the one who flew over terrain rather than walking through it. What did you do for exposure? For dehydration. How long could a person last without water in this heat? 3 days, he remembered reading somewhere. Maybe less in the desert, maybe a lot less. The 4th hour brought a strange clarity. Pain from the rope burns faded to a dull throb, thus became a constant companion rather than an emergency. Cole's mind began to drift, and in that drift memories surfaced that he'd spent years pushing down. His father's face. Not the tired, disappointed version from Cole's college years, but the earlier one. The father who'd lifted a 6-year-old Cole onto a horse for the first time, big hands steady and sure. Who'd taught him to read the sky for weather, to check fence lines for breaks, to approach cattle slowly so you didn't spook them. Who'd made him hot chocolate after cold mornings, checking on newborn calves. Who'd been patient and kind and certain that the work mattered. "We're steward's son," Thomas Radley had said once, standing on a ridge overlooking the ranch. Cole must have been 9 or 10. That means we're responsible, not just for the land, but for everyone who depends on it. The families who work here, the animals in our care, the people who'll come after us. You understand? Cole had nodded, not really understanding, just wanting to please his father. "Someday this will be yours," Thomas had continued. "And I hope you'll take better care of it than I have." I hope you'll see what I sometimes forget, that wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in relationships, in community, in what you build that lasts after you're gone. Cole remembered feeling proud in that moment, feeling chosen and important. He'd wanted to be the kind of man his father described. He'd wanted to matter the way Thomas Radley mattered to so many people. When had that changed? When his mother died, certainly. But maybe it started before that. Maybe it started the first time Cole realized his father's philosophy made them poorer than their neighbors, made them work harder for less, made them vulnerable to every drought and market shift while corporate farms expanded and prospered. Maybe it started the first time. Cole felt embarrassed by his father's old-fashioned values at a school event where other kids' parents drove newer trucks and wore cleaner clothes and didn't smell like cattle and hay. Or maybe, and this thought hit Cole hard enough that he gasped, maybe it had never changed at all. Maybe he'd just buried the part of himself that believed what his father taught, buried it so deep he'd convinced himself it was gone. Buried it because believing made everything hurt too much. The sun crawled across the sky. Shadows lengthened. Cole's skin burned despite his long sleeves. He managed to reach the water bottle by the 5th hour, gripping it awkwardly with bound hands, getting it to his mouth through sheer determination. He rationed it, knowing he had to make it last, but his body screamed for more. Half the bottle disappeared in desperate gulps before he forced himself to stop. As the heat of the day began to ease into evening, Cole felt something in his pocket pressing against his leg. His wallet. His phone was in the car, useless, but his wallet was right there. Not that it mattered. Money couldn't buy rope-gnawing services from the lizards sunning themselves on nearby rocks. His platinum credit card wouldn't call for help, but there was something else in his wallet. Cole shifted, managing to work his bound hands around enough to extract it. A photograph fell into the dirt. He hadn't known it was there, hadn't put it there himself. His father must have slipped it in years ago, and Cole had never noticed. The photograph was old, the kind with white borders and slightly faded colors that dated it to the 70s or early 80s. It showed Thomas Radley younger, standing in front of a building Cole didn't recognize. But what caught his attention were the people surrounding his father. Families, men, women, children, all dressed for something special, all smiling. Everyone looked happy, prosperous even, in a modest way. The building behind them had a sign Cole could barely make out. Mesa Verde Community Center. Cole's breath caught. Mesa Verde, this property. He studied the faces more carefully. That man on the left, wasn't that Martinez, 30 years younger? And the woman holding the child, she looked like she could be related to Santos. The building itself showed pride in every detail. Fresh paint and clean windows, and flowers in boxes under the windows. His father had built something here. Something that mattered enough to photograph, to commemorate, to apparently carry in his wallet until the day he died. And Cole had bought this land with the specific intention of destroying whatever remained and selling it to mining companies. The realization settled over him like the cooling desert evening. This wasn't just any property. This was part of his father's legacy, the part Cole had never bothered to learn about. The part those three men, Martinez, Santos, Rivera, their faces right there in the photograph, had tried to tell him about before they left him here. The land will teach you what you need to know, Rivera had said. Cole looked around at the empty desert, at the scrub brush and rocky soil his professional eye had dismissed as worthless. What was he supposed to learn? That he was a failure? That he'd betrayed everything his father stood for? He already knew that. He'd known it for years. He just hadn't cared or hadn't let himself care. The distinctions suddenly seemed important. Sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, orange bleeding into pink, purple shadows stretching across the land. Cole had always been too busy to watch sunsets, too focused on the next deal, the next property, the next number in his account. Now he had nothing to do but watch, and the beauty of it struck him with unexpected force. His father had loved evenings like this, had often stood on the ranch house porch at twilight, coffee in hand, just looking. "You miss so much when you're always rushing," Thomas had told teenage Cole once. The land talks, but you have to be still enough to listen. Cole had rolled his eyes at that, teenager certain that his father was being deliberately obtuse. Land didn't talk. Land was just dirt and rock and economic potential. Now tied to a tree and possibly dying, Cole wondered if he'd been wrong about more than just that. Full dark came fast once the sun dropped below the horizon. Temperature plummeted. Cole's sweat-soaked shirt turned clammy. He began to shiver, muscles cramping from hours in the same position. The stars emerged, more than he'd ever seen in the city, so many they looked like spilled salt across black cloth. He heard coyotes in the distance. Closer, something moved through the brush, rabbits probably, or mice. The desert came alive at night, Cole realized. All the creatures that hid from the day's heat emerged to hunt and forage. The land his professional assessment had called empty was actually teeming with life. He'd just never bothered to notice. His mind started to play tricks as exhaustion and dehydration advanced. He thought he saw his father walking toward him through the starlight, that familiar rolling gait, cowboy hat, silhouetted against the sky. But it was just a juniper tree, branches moving in the breeze. He thought he heard his mother's voice singing, the lullabies from his childhood, but it was just wind through the cottonwood leaves. Cole closed his eyes. If this was how he died, there was a certain justice to it. Killed by the land he'd spent years exploiting. Destroyed by the desert he'd dismissed as worthless. His father would have appreciated the irony, might have even called it appropriate. That's when he heard them. Footsteps, multiple, approaching through the darkness. Not human footsteps. Too many, too light. Cole's eyes snapped open. His heart rate spiked. Every predator story he'd ever heard suddenly seemed very relevant. 6 shapes emerged from the shadows. The dogs, the same 6 strays he'd chased away days ago. They moved deliberately, purposefully, forming a circle around him and the tree. Moonlight caught their eyes, amber, gold, green, reflecting back at him with an intelligence that seemed impossible. Cole held perfectly still. This was it then. After everything, he'd be torn apart by feral dogs on a piece of land he'd tried to steal. The poetic justice was almost overwhelming. The largest dog, a shepherd mixed with a torn ear, approached slowly. Cole pressed back against the tree, making himself small, knowing it was pointless. The dog came close enough that Cole could smell it, dust and sage and something wild. It held his gaze for a long moment, head tilted, studying him. Then it lowered its head to the ropes binding Cole's wrists and began, deliberately and carefully, to chew. Cole sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The dog's teeth worked at the rope with methodical patience, not tearing or ripping, but gnawing with precision. Strand by strand, the fibers separated. The other 5 dogs maintained their circle, watching, waiting, their attention split between Cole and the darkness beyond. It took maybe 10 minutes, though Cole's sense of time had become unreliable. The rope finally gave way. Cole's arms fell forward, suddenly free, and the relief was so intense he nearly wept. His shoulders screamed as circulation returned. His wrists were raw and bleeding where the rope had cut in. But his hands worked when he flexed them. The shepherd dog stepped back, sat and waited. Cole stared at it, at all of them, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. Dogs didn't do this. Feral animals didn't carefully free people who'd thrown rocks at them. This defied everything logical, everything explainable. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice rough from dehydration and hours of silence. The words felt inadequate. The shepherd's tail moved once, a single acknowledgement. Then it stood and walked a few paces away before looking back at Cole expectantly. Cole fumbled with the ropes around his ankles, his fingers clumsy and weak. The knots were tight and his hands shook, but eventually he worked them loose. He tried to stand and immediately fell, his legs refusing to support him. The dogs waited patiently while he crawled, then got to his knees, then finally, gripping the cottonwood for support, pulled himself upright. Every muscle in his body protested. His head swam. He took 2 steps toward his Range Rover, toward escape and civilization and explanations that made sense, but the dogs moved to block his path. Not aggressively, They simply stood there, a living barrier. 6 pairs of eyes reflecting moonlight. The shepherd barked once, short and sharp, then turned and began walking in the opposite direction, away from Cole's vehicle, deeper into the property. The other 5 followed. After maybe 20 yards, the shepherd stopped and looked back. Cole understood. They wanted him to follow them. Every instinct told him to refuse, to push past the dogs, get to his car, drive away from this impossible situation and never look back. But his keys were in his pocket. He checked and his car was locked. He had no water left. His body was already seriously dehydrated, and somehow, impossibly, these dogs had just saved his life. More than that, something in their behavior suggested purpose. They hadn't freed him randomly. They wanted something from him, or wanted to show him something. The photograph in his pocket felt heavy, a reminder that this land held secrets he'd never bothered to discover. Cole took a step toward the dogs, then another. His legs wobbled but held. The shepherd's tail wagged once, then it turned and began walking again. Cole followed. They moved slowly through the darkness, Cole stumbling over rocks and plants he couldn't see clearly, the dogs navigating with easy confidence. The shepherd led, while the others flanked Cole, keeping him moving in the right direction when he veered off course. It felt choreographed, practiced, like they'd done this before. After maybe 15 minutes of walking, Cole heard it, the sound of water. Not much, just a trickle, but in the desert it called out like a siren. The dogs led him to a small spring emerging from between rocks, creating a pool no more than 3 feet across before disappearing into the sandy soil. The water looked clean, clear enough to see the bottom even in moonlight. Cole fell to his knees and drank. He knew he should be careful, pace himself, but his body overrode his brain. He drank until his stomach hurt, then sat back gasping. The dogs drank too, lapping delicately, somehow still watching him even as they satisfied their own thirst. Cole splashed water on his face, on his wrists where the rope had cut deep. The coolness was blessed relief. He sat beside the spring for long minutes, feeling strength slowly return to his limbs, his mind clearing slightly from the fog of dehydration. "How did you know?" he asked the shepherd. "How did you know this was here?" The dog cocked its head, that too intelligent look in its eyes, then stood and moved to a nearby creosote bush. It nosed something out from beneath the branches and carried it back to Cole in its mouth, dropping it at his feet. A wooden cross, not large, maybe 8 inches tall, but carefully carved from what looked like juniper wood. The years had weathered it, turning the surface silver grey, but the craftsmanship was still evident. Someone had put time and skill into this object. On the crossbar, barely visible in the moonlight, were initials carved deep. T.R. Thomas Radley. Cole picked it up with trembling hands. His father had made this. The style was unmistakable. Thomas had carved as a hobby, usually while sitting on the porch in the evenings. Cole had dozens of small wooden animals his father had made for him as a child, all showing this same patient attention to detail. But why was it here? Why leave a cross by a hidden spring in the middle of this property? The shepherd barked again, insistent now, and began walking. The other dogs fell in line. Cole had no choice but to follow, clutching the wooden cross, his father's craftsmanship smooth against his palm. They walked for another 20 minutes, maybe longer. Cole's sense of direction was completely lost. He had no idea where they were in relation to his car or the cottonwood tree or anything else. He was utterly dependent on these dogs, and the strangeness of that dependency was almost as overwhelming as his exhaustion. Then he saw it, a structure silhouetted against the stars. At first, he thought it might be a natural rock formation, but as they got closer, the lines became clearly man-made. Adobe walls, a collapsed roof, windows like empty eye sockets, an old homestead, abandoned but still standing, stubborn in the way of desert buildings that could last centuries if the desert allowed. The dogs led him to the doorway. No door remained, just an opening, and stopped. The shepherd looked at Cole, then at the building, then back at Cole. The message was clear: go inside. Cole hesitated. The structure looked old, probably unstable. Going into unknown buildings in the dark was asking for a broken ankle or worse. But the dogs remained insistent, and exhaustion made decision-making difficult. He needed rest. He needed shelter. This building offered both. He stepped carefully through the doorway. Moonlight through the window gaps provided just enough illumination to see the interior. One large room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with what had once been a sleeping area partitioned off. The roof was partially intact over that section, providing some protection. The floor was packed earth, surprisingly clean considering the years of abandonment. As Cole's eyes adjusted, he began to notice details. A rusted wood stove in one corner, shelves on the walls, empty now but carefully constructed. A stone hearth. Someone had lived here, made a home here, cared for this place. The dogs filed in after him, spreading out around the room like sentries. The shepherd approached Cole and sat directly in front of him, staring with those knowing eyes until Cole sat too, his back against the adobe wall. Then the dog lay down across Cole's legs, a warm weight that was somehow both restraining and comforting. The other dogs settled nearby, forming a protective circle. Their presence filled the room with the sounds of breathing and the occasional shift of paws on dirt. Cole should have been afraid, trapped in a ruin with 6 feral dogs, but instead he felt oddly safe. They'd saved him. They'd led him to water. Now they were guarding him while he rested. He looked down at the wooden cross still clutched in his hand. His father had been here, had known this place. The photograph, the cross, the way those 3 men had spoken about Thomas Radley's connection to this land, it all pointed to a history Cole had never imagined existed. "What was he doing here, Dad?" Cole whispered into the darkness. "What did you build?" No answer came, but Cole felt something shift inside him. A crack in the wall he'd built around the part of himself that could still care about something beyond profit margins and property values. His father's voice echoed in memory. "We're stewards, son. We're responsible." Cole closed his eyes. The exhaustion was overwhelming now, dragging him down towards sleep. He should stay awake, stay alert, but his body had other plans. The dog across his legs was warm, grounding, real. The other dog's breathing created a rhythm like a lullaby. Just before he slipped into unconsciousness, Cole realized something strange. He was lying in a ruin in the middle of nowhere, his body battered and burned, surrounded by feral dogs, with nothing but questions and a wooden cross carved by his dead father. And yet, for the first time in years, maybe since his mother died, he didn't feel completely alone. Cole woke to golden light streaming through gaps in the wall. For a confused moment, he didn't know where he was, his mind expecting hotel sheets or his memory foam mattress. Then his body reminded him, every muscle aching, his wrists burning where the ropes had cut, his lips cracked and painful. The dog that had been lying across his legs was gone. All 6 were sitting near the doorway, backlit by morning sun, watching him with that same patient intensity. The shepherd stood when Cole stirred, stretching in a way that seemed almost like an invitation. Cole groaned as he pushed himself upright. His mouth tasted like dust and regret. He was filthy, his expensive clothes torn and stained, his $200 haircut now a mess of sweat and dirt. He looked, he imagined, like a man who'd spent the night in a ruin, which was exactly what he was, but he was alive. That counted for something. Morning light revealed details Cole had missed in the darkness. The homestead was indeed old, probably 40 or 50 years abandoned, but it had been built with care. The adobe walls were thick, the window placements considered to maximize light while minimizing heat. Someone had known what they were doing. Cole stood carefully, his legs protesting but functional. He moved around the room, examining everything with new attention. The shelves weren't just shelves. They were hand-carved with small decorative elements along the edges, flowers and vines rendered in simple but skillful lines. The wood stove was a good brand, expensive even now, suggesting whoever lived here had invested in quality. On one wall, barely visible behind years of dust, he found something that made him stop. A photograph still in its frame, though the glass was cracked. Cole lifted it carefully, wiping the surface with his sleeve. A family, Mother, father, 3 children ranging maybe from 5 to 12 years old. They stood in front of this very building, the homestead behind them new and whole, the roof intact, flowers growing in boxes under the windows. The mother was beautiful, the father strong and proud, the children grinning with the unself-consciousness of the secure and loved. Everyone wore their best clothes, and the father's hand rested on what looked like a bronze plaque mounted beside the door. Cole turned to where that plaque would have been. The mounting brackets were still there, rusted but present. He searched the floor, the corners, and finally found it half buried in wind-blown sand near the hearth. Bronze, weathered green but still legible. Formal letters spelled out, Rivera family, founded 1967, Rivera. One of the 3 men who'd tied him to the tree. This had been his family's home, or his parents' home, built nearly 60 years ago. And Cole had bought this land with plans to let mining companies tear it all up. He looked at the photograph again, really looked. The pride in their faces, the sense of accomplishment and hope. This wasn't just a house. This had been a dream realized, a future staked out in the hard desert ground. The children in that photo would be in their 50s now, maybe older. Where were they? Had they grown up here? What had driven them away? Cole set the photograph back on its nail, the plaque beside it. His hands were shaking. He tried to tell himself it was just the residual effects of dehydration, but he knew better. This was emotion, the kind he'd spent years teaching himself not to feel. Guilt, shame, recognition of harm caused. More photographs hung on other walls, revealing themselves as Cole's eyes adjusted to the dim interior. Birthday parties. Christmases with a small pine tree somehow coaxed to grow in a pot. First communions. A wedding, the eldest daughter in a simple white dress, radiant. Life documented in aging Polaroids and fading Kodachromes. Life lived in this place Cole had dismissed as worthless. In what had been the sleeping area, he found children's drawings pinned to the wall, protected under the still intact portion of roof. Crayon renderings of horses and dogs and the family standing under a blazing sun. One drawing showed this house connected to other houses by carefully drawn lines, with stick figures moving between them. Community, illustrated by a child's understanding of connection. Cole sank down on the remains of what might have been a bench, overwhelmed. His father had known about this place. The photograph in his pocket proved it. Thomas Radley had been part of whatever created this homestead, this community. And Cole had never asked, never cared enough to dig into his father's past beyond what directly affected him. He remembered being 12 years old, maybe a year or 2 before his mother died. His father had come home late one night, dusty and tired, but smiling in a way that suggested deep satisfaction. Young Cole had asked where he'd been. Working on something important, Thomas had said. Something that'll outlast me. What kind of something? His father had ruffled his hair. You'll see someday. When you're older, when you understand what matters. But Cole never asked again, and his father never explained. Then his mother died, and the distance between them grew until it became a chasm too wide to cross. Whatever Thomas Radley had been building, whatever mattered so much, Cole had let it disappear into the past, like everything else he found too painful to examine. The shepherd dog appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning. It barked once, then turned and trotted away. The other dogs fell in line behind it. The message was clear, time to move. Cole stood, pocketed the bronze plaque. He couldn't say why, just that leaving it felt wrong, and followed. His body had stiffened during rest, making walking painful, but movement gradually eased the worst of it. The spring was close enough that he detoured to drink deeply, splashing water on his face and neck, trying to wash away some of the grime. It didn't help much. The dogs led him up a slight rise, and from that vantage point Cole saw what he'd missed in darkness. More structures, not just one abandoned homestead, but several, spread across the landscape in a rough semicircle. From this height, he could count at least 8 buildings, possibly more hidden by terrain or vegetation. This wasn't a single failed residence. This was a settlement, his breath caught. The photograph from his wallet showed a community center. The Rivera plaque showed a founding date of 1967, the wooden cross his father had carved. All of it pointed to the same impossible truth. Thomas Radley had helped create a community here, on land everyone, including Cole, had dismissed as worthless desert scrub. The dogs descended the rise and headed toward the nearest building. Cole followed, his mind reeling. Each homestead they passed showed the same pattern: careful construction, signs of family life, abandonment but not destruction. These places had been left, not destroyed. People had walked away, taking what they could carry, but leaving their dreams behind in adobe and memory. At the third homestead, Cole found toys in what had been a child's room. Wooden cars, a doll with faded cloth dress, a baseball worn smooth with use. At the fourth, he found a kitchen still equipped with pots and pans hanging from hooks, as if the cook had just stepped away for a moment and never returned. At the fifth, books lined a shelf: westerns, mysteries, a Bible, a Spanish-English dictionary, someone's carefully curated library, abandoned to dust and time. Each discovery was a small heartbreak. Each remnant of life lived and lost added weight to the growing sense that Cole had stumbled into something he wasn't equipped to understand. His business model didn't account for this. You couldn't put a price on dreams. You couldn't amortize hope. You couldn't calculate the value of a community in spreadsheets and contracts. The dogs led him steadily through the settlement, giving him time at each structure to absorb what he was seeing. They seemed to know what he needed to understand, guiding him like a tour through his father's secret history. And with each homestead, Cole felt something inside him shifting, cracking, breaking open in ways both painful and necessary. By the time they reached the largest building, clearly the community center from the photograph, the sun was climbing toward noon. Cole was desperately thirsty again, hungry, exhausted, and emotionally wrung out. But he couldn't stop now. He had to see, had to understand. The community center's double doors still hung on their hinges, warped but present. Cole pushed them open and stepped into a large room that might have held 50 people comfortably. A stage at one end, windows along both sides, a ceiling that had mostly collapsed, letting in shafts of dusty sunlight, and on every wall, photographs. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe. A visual history of this place and the people who'd built it. Cole moved from image to image, seeing the same faces age over years, seeing children grow into teenagers and adults, seeing celebrations and workdays and ordinary moments deemed worthy of preservation. And in so many of them, impossible to miss, stood Thomas Radley. His father, younger, smiling, surrounded by people who clearly loved him, building walls, celebrating milestones, holding babies. His father, who Cole thought he'd known, living a whole life here that Cole had never imagined existed. Cole stood in the community center for what felt like hours, moving from photograph to photograph like a man in a gallery studying masterworks. But these weren't art, these were evidence, proof of something his father had built while Cole was busy being young and self-absorbed, then later busy being angry and deliberately blind. Here was Thomas Radley with his arm around Martinez, younger Martinez, with black hair instead of gray, laughing at something off camera. Here was Thomas helping Santos frame a wall, both men shirtless in the heat, muscles straining with honest labor. Here was a group photo dated 1969, at least 20 families arranged in neat rows, his father in the center holding a sign that read, Mesa Verde Cooperative, Year 1. Cooperative. The word felt foreign in Cole's world of leveraged buyouts and hostile negotiations. But that's what this had been, not a business, not a scheme. A cooperative, where people worked together toward common goals, where success meant everyone rising rather than one person climbing over others. The dogs had settled on the stage, watching Cole move through his discovery. They seemed patient now, no longer pushing him forward, content to let him absorb this at his own pace. The shepherd's torn ear caught the light, and Cole noticed for the first time that the tear looked old, well-healed, a survivor's mark, like the scars on Cole's wrists. Through windows on the far wall, Cole saw another building he hadn't noticed before, smaller, with a distinctive bell tower, or what remained of one. A schoolhouse had to be. The dogs stood when he moved toward the door, falling in behind him as he crossed the dusty ground between buildings. The schoolhouse door hung half off its hinges. Cole eased past it carefully. Inside, rows of small desks remained, sized for children, most still upright, though covered in decades of dust. A chalkboard occupied one wall, ghost images of lessons still faintly visible, alphabet letters across the top. Numbers 1 through 20, a teacher's desk at the front, papers scattered across its surface, lesson plans abandoned mid-thought. But what caught Cole's attention was the bell. It hung in what remained of the tower, accessible through a ladder built into the wall. The bell itself was rusty, orange with oxidation, but substantial, real bronze beneath the decay. Someone had invested real money in this, buying quality that would last generations. When Cole reached up and pulled the rope that still dangled from its mount, the bell sang out clear and strong, the sound carrying across the desert in waves. The dogs all raised their heads, ears pricked. For a moment, Cole could imagine this place alive. Children pouring out of homesteads at the bell's call, running toward learning and friendship, and the promise of futures built on community and shared work. His father's vision, realized in bronze and adobe and hopeful young lives. Cole descended carefully and began exploring the schoolhouse properly. The desks yielded treasures, carved initials, notes passed between students, homework assignments never completed. In one desk, a math book open to multiplication tables with problems, worked out in careful handwriting. In another, a reader with an inscription, "To Ricardo for trying so hard, Mrs. Johnson, 1974. Ricardo Rivera, maybe. The child in the photograph from the first homestead, grown now. One of the men who tied Cole to a tree, who'd learned his multiplication tables in this room, read from this book, heard this bell calling him to education and possibility. The teacher's desk held more substantial records. Glass rosters going back to 1967. Cole saw the names: Martinez, Santos, Rivera, Cordova, Alvarez, Johnson, Webb, Guyen, a mix of Hispanic, Anglo, and Vietnamese names, suggesting this community had welcomed whoever came seeking honest work and a chance at building something lasting. He found attendance records, grade reports, notes about students' progress and struggles. Mrs. Johnson, whoever she'd been, had cared deeply about her charges. Her handwriting in the margins showed patience and attention. Roberto is trying hard with reading. Need to get him glasses? And Maria is a natural with numbers. Encourage her toward college? College. From a one-room schoolhouse in the desert, this teacher had dreamed big for her students, had believed they could rise beyond this hard-scrabble beginning, had invested in futures that apparently never materialized, at least not here. Cole found a filing cabinet against one wall, surprisingly intact. Inside, more records, community meeting notes, budget documents, maintenance schedules, and bound in a leather folder marked Founding Documents, the original charter for Mesa Verde Cooperative. He read it standing there in the dusty schoolhouse, his hands trembling slightly. The charter spelled out a vision: common ownership of land, shared resources, democratic decision-making, commitment to sustainability and stewardship. Every family would contribute according to their ability and receive according to their need. No one would own more than anyone else. Success would be measured in community well-being, not individual wealth. At the bottom, signatures. Thomas Radley first and largest, then 20 others, each signing on to this radical experiment in cooperative living. His father had put his name, his reputation, his resources behind this idea. In 1965, when the country was tearing itself apart over Vietnam and civil rights, when conventional wisdom said isolation and individual gain were the only paths to security, Thomas Radley had chosen the opposite. Cole felt tears on his face before he realized he was crying. Not the desperate tears of a man thinking he might die in the desert, but something deeper. Grief, yes, but also recognition. His father had been extraordinary in ways Cole had never allowed himself to see. had lived his values when doing so was hard and costly, had believed in something beyond himself, and Cole had spent the last 5 years systematically destroying everything similar his father had built elsewhere, including the original Radley ranch, had sold it to a corporate farm that immediately fired all the long-time employees and converted the operation to automated industrial agriculture, had scattered the community his father had nurtured for decades. The dogs were moving again, heading toward the door. Cole replaced the founding documents carefully, as if they were sacred texts. Maybe they were. He followed the dogs outside into the bright afternoon heat. They led him past the schoolhouse toward the far edge of the settlement. Here, on a slight rise with a view across the whole property, Cole saw crosses, weathered wooden crosses, maybe a dozen of them marking graves in neat rows. A cemetery. The shepherd approached the first grave and sat beside it, looking at Cole expectantly. Cole knelt and read the simple marker. Robert Martinez, 1931-1995. He built well. Martinez's father, perhaps. Or uncle. The family name Cole had heard just yesterday, now attached to a man who'd lived and died here, whose life had been deemed worthy of this simple monument. The next grave. Elena Santos, 1945-1998. Her garden fed us all. Another familiar name. Another life lived in service to community. Cole moved down the row, reading each marker. Some had just names and dates. Others had brief epitaphs that spoke volumes. Teacher and friend, brought water from stone, made us laugh, kept us honest. These were people who'd mattered, who'd been remembered and honored by those who loved them. And then Cole saw it. The grave that made him fall to his knees in the dusty ground. Maria Elena Santos, 1932-1998, heart of our home. Maria Elena. He knew that name. Knew it because she'd been in his life, though he'd never understood her significance. She'd been his father's housekeeper when Cole was young, though housekeeper seemed too small a word for what she'd been. Maria Elena had been the person who made sure young Cole ate vegetables and did his homework, who'd bandaged his scraped knees and scolded him gently in Spanish when he tracked mud through the house, who'd been there when his mother died, holding both Cole and his father as they wept. Her strength the only thing keeping them upright. Maria Elena had left their employment when Cole was maybe 13 or 14, and he'd never thought much about it beyond vague annoyance that someone new had to learn his preferences. She'd just been staff, easily replaceable in his child's mind, but she hadn't been staff. She'd been family. Had been part of this community his father helped build. Had been, according to her epitaph, the heart of their home, not just the Radley house, but this home, this cooperative, this experiment in living differently. And his father had mourned her. Cole remembered now, distantly, that Thomas had traveled somewhere for a funeral around 1998, had been gone for several days, had come back quieter, sadder, more withdrawn. Cole, deep in his college years and his own self-absorption, hadn't asked questions. The shepherd pressed against Cole's side, warm and solid. The other dogs formed a circle around him, as they had the night before. Protection or comfort or both. Cole let himself cry properly now, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in his chest. Crying for Maria Elena, who'd loved him. Crying for his father, who'd tried so hard to teach him what mattered. Crying for all these people who'd built something beautiful and seen it fail. Crying for himself, for the man he'd become, for the years spent running from everything his father valued. The sun beat down. The desert wind carried the scent of sage. Somewhere in the distance, that rusty bell in the schoolhouse creaked on its mountings, singing softly in the breeze. And Cole knelt in the dust beside Maria Elena's grave, finally understanding what he'd lost. Cole eventually stood, his knees protesting, his face sticky with dried tears. The sun had moved across the sky while he'd been lost in grief. Late afternoon now, shadows lengthening, and he still had no plan beyond following wherever these dogs led him. No water left, no food. No rational explanation for why he was still walking deeper into this abandoned place instead of trying to find his way back to civilization. but rationality seemed less important than it once had. 48 hours ago, Cole's world had made perfect sense. Numbers on spreadsheets, contracts signed, properties flipped for profit. Now that world felt thin and false, a stage set he'd mistaken for reality. This place, these ruins, this evidence of his father's hidden life, this felt more real than anything Cole had touched in years. The dogs were moving again, but not with their earlier urgency. They seemed to understand Cole needed time to process. The shepherd stayed close, occasionally pressing against his leg as they walked. The others ranged around him in a loose protective formation. Whatever they were, and Cole was increasingly uncertain about that, they'd become his companions in this strange journey. They led him back to the community center. Cole had thought he'd seen everything there, but the dogs took him to a door he'd missed before, half hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. It opened with difficulty, swollen in its frame, but eventually gave way to reveal a smaller room. An office, maybe, or a private meeting space. A desk dominated the center, surprisingly intact. Built-in bookshelves lined one wall, mostly empty now, but for a few surviving volumes. And on the desk, protected by a glass-topped case that had somehow remained unbroken through decades of abandonment, lay a large leather-bound book. Cole approached it carefully, as if it might disappear if he moved too quickly. The glass case lifted off easily. The book was a logbook, the kind used for official records. Mesa Verde Cooperative Community Log was embossed in gold on the cover, faded but still legible. He opened it with reverent hands. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1965, in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Today we break ground. 20 families, 400 acres, one dream. If we can make this work, prove that people can live together based on cooperation rather than competition, maybe we offer hope in these troubled times. The land is hard, but so are we. God willing, our children will see what we've built and know there's another way. Cole turned pages slowly, absorbing entry after entry, spanning decades. Community decisions were recorded meticulously. Who would work which fields, how resources would be allocated, conflicts resolved, celebrations planned. Different handwriting showed different authors, but his father's appeared most frequently, suggesting Thomas Radley had served as some kind of leader or record keeper. Entries from the late 60s and early 70s buzzed with optimism. Harvests recorded, children born, new families welcomed, achievements celebrated, first year we're entirely self-sufficient in vegetables. Martinez, family finished their new room. School. Enrollment up to 32 students. But as Cole read forward, through the 70s and into the 80s, a different tone emerged. Concerns about water, drought years taking their toll, young people leaving for opportunities elsewhere. The community aging, fewer children, harder to maintain everything. Then Cole found the entry that stopped him cold. May 17, 1983, in his father's hand. Cole turned 15 today. Growing fast, already tall as me. He's at that age where he thinks his old man is a fool, and maybe he's right. He has no interest in this place, no patience for the cooperative model. He wants bigger things, faster things, things that glitter. I watch him and fear I've failed him somehow. But I have to believe that when he's older, when he's lived enough to see how shallow that life can be, he'll come back to these values. When my boy is grown, he'll see what we built here. He'll understand that wealth means nothing if it doesn't create home for others. I have to believe that. It's all I have. Cole's vision blurred. He had to set the book down, step away, breathe. His father had written this on Cole's 15th birthday, 2 years before his mother died, 3 years before Cole would leave for college and never really come back. Thomas Radley had known even then that he was losing his son, had feared it, had still hoped, and Cole had proven every fear justified. Had taken his father's gift of education and financial support and used it to become exactly the kind of man Thomas Radley would have despised. Had built a career on destroying what his father spent his life creating. The shepherd whined softly, pressing against Cole's leg. The other dogs had arranged themselves around the room, watching with that uncanny attentiveness. Cole noticed something he hadn't before, the way they seemed to respond to his emotional state. When he was calm, they were relaxed. When his distress peaked, they pressed closer, offering physical comfort. It was too deliberate to be coincidence, too sophisticated to be simple animal behavior. "What are you?" Cole asked them softly. "How do you know?" The shepherd tilted its head, but offered no answers beyond its steady presence. Cole returned to the logbook, forcing himself to continue reading. The late 80s brought more challenges. The drought intensified. Wells ran dry. Several families left, unable to sustain themselves. The entries grew more sparse, sometimes months between them. Then in the early 90s, a new problem emerged. A mining company had started surveying adjacent properties. They'd approached the cooperative about purchasing rights. The community voted no unanimously, but the pressure continued. Letters from lawyers, offers that increased, threats of eminent domain, though nothing ever came of them. Thomas Radley's entries from this period showed his growing concern. The world outside doesn't understand what we've built. To them, this is just underutilized land, wasted potential. They can't see the wealth that isn't measured in dollars. I fear we won't survive this pressure. Not because we'll give in, but because we're already struggling, and this fight takes energy we don't have to spare. The drought broke in 1998. But by then, it was too late. The community had shrunk to just a handful of families. The school closed due to lack of students. Young people had scattered to cities, seeking jobs and opportunities the cooperative couldn't provide. Maria Elena died that year, and Thomas Radley's entry about her funeral was brief but telling. "She was our heart, and without her, I fear this place will die too." By 2000, only 3 families remained. The entries became irregular, maintenance records mostly, small details of a community in its final days. The last entry was dated March 2003, not in his father's hand, but in handwriting Cole didn't recognize. "Tom Radley came by today. Said he's turning the property over to a trust, legal protection, to preserve what we built here. Only 4 of us left now, and we're all too old to keep this going. But maybe someday, when the world is ready, people will come back. Tom believes in resurrection. I hope he's right. A trust. His father had created legal protection for this place. But if that was true, how had Cole been able to purchase it? How had Raymond found it available for development? Cole looked through the remaining pages, but they were blank. The story ended there, in 2003, 2 years before his father's death. Whatever happened next wasn't recorded here. The shepherd barked sharply, making Cole jump. The dog was staring at a section of wall with intense focus. Cole followed its gaze and saw a small cabinet he'd missed before, built into the wall itself. The dogs had led him to the logbook. Now they seemed to be directing him towards something else. He opened the cabinet carefully. Inside was a metal box, fireproof judging by its weight and construction. It was locked, but the lock was old and simple. Cole found a letter opener on the desk and, feeling only slightly guilty about breaking into what was essentially his father's private papers, forced it open. Documents, legal papers. And on top, a letter addressed to him in his father's handwriting. "Cole, if you're reading this, maybe I was right about you after all. Maybe there's still time." "Dad!" His hands shook as he unfolded the letter, but before he could read it, the shepherd barked again, urgent this time. All 6 dogs had moved to the door, their attention fixed on something outside. Their hackles were raised, bodies tense. Whatever they sensed, it wasn't friendly. Cole shoved the letter and the metal box's contents into his pockets and moved to the window. In the distance, visible through heat shimmer, he saw dust plumes. Vehicles multiple heading this way. The dogs growled low in their throats, a sound that raised the hair on Cole's neck. Someone was coming, and judging by the dog's reaction, whoever it was meant trouble. Cole's first instinct was to hide, but the dogs had different ideas. They positioned themselves between him and the door, not cowering but ready, protective. The shepherd looked back at him once, and Cole understood. They wouldn't abandon him. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together. The vehicles, 3 SUVs from what Cole could tell, stopped near the community center. Doors opened. Men climbed out, 5 or 6 of them, dressed in casual clothes, but moving with the coordinated precision of security personnel. And then, from the lead vehicle, a figure Cole recognized even at a distance, Raymond Voss. His business partner stepped into the afternoon sun, looking exactly as he always did, expensive sunglasses, designer casual wear, silver hair perfectly styled despite the heat. He surveyed the settlement with the same expression Cole had seen him use at dozens of properties, calculating value, dismissing history, seeing only numbers. Cole's mind raced. How had Raymond found him? How did he even know to look here? Unless Raymond had been involved from the start. Unless the 3 men tying Cole to a tree hadn't been random violence, but something more orchestrated. Unless everything about this deal had been orchestrated from the beginning. Cole pulled back from the window before Raymond could spot him. His heart hammered. The dogs remained absolutely still, their attention fixed on the men outside. Cole forced himself to think past panic. The metal box! His father's letter. The documents. He pulled them from his pockets and began reading quickly. The letter was brief. Cole, if you're reading this, you found Mesa Verde. I hoped you would, someday. Though I never figured out how to bring you here myself. You were always so angry with me after your mother died, and I never knew how to bridge that gap. This place was my dream, still is. I put it in a trust, legal and permanent, so it can't be sold or destroyed. Someday, maybe, people will come back. Maybe you'll help them. Maybe you'll understand what I was trying to teach you all those years. The documents in this box prove the trust exists. Guard them. This land matters more than you know. Love always, Dad. Cole's throat tightened, but he pushed emotion aside and focused on the documents. Trust papers, dated 2003, his father's signature. A lawyer's notarization. Everything looked legitimate, establishing the Mesa Verde property as protected land in perpetuity, with stewardship passing to any Radley heir committed to preserving the cooperative's original vision. That meant Cole. As Thomas Radley's only child, the stewardship should have been his. But Cole had never been informed of any trust. When his father died and the estate was settled, the lawyer had presented everything as straightforward inheritance, ranch, assets, personal effects. No mention of Mesa Verde or protected trust, which meant someone had hidden this, or destroyed the original documents. Or Cole found another document, this one dated 2020, 6 months after his father's death. A dissolution of trust, signed by someone claiming to be the legal executor of Thomas Radley's estate. Cole studied the signature. It looked like his father's hand, but something was off. The pressure was wrong. The loops too perfect. This was a forgery, had to be, and at the bottom, as the lawyer who'd processed the dissolution, was a name Cole didn't recognize, Gerald Brewster, attorney at law. But attached to that document, held with a paperclip, was correspondence on letterhead Cole did recognize, Raymond Voss, Properties LLC. The letters were dated a few months after his father's death. Raymond, writing to this Gerald Brewster, discussing the Radley Trust situation and need for discretion, referencing significant mining interests and our mutual client's requirements, outlining a plan to dissolve the trust quietly, get the property freed up for sale, and split the eventual profits. Cole's vision tunneled. His business partner, the man he'd trusted for 3 years, the man who'd helped build his company, the man who Cole had thought was a friend, had been working against him from the start, had used Cole's grief and distance from his father to manipulate the estate, had forged documents, bribed or corrupted a lawyer, and systematically dismantled Thomas Radley's final legacy. And Cole had been the perfect tool, too busy with his own business to look closely at paperwork, too estranged from his father to question irregularities, too eager to prove himself successful to ask where opportunities came from. Raymond had identified the Mesa Verde property, erased its protection, and then brought it to Cole as a discovery, knowing Cole would jump at the chance to flip cheap land to mining. Interests, Cole had been played, used, turned into the instrument of his father's dreams. Destruction by a man who'd never cared about anything but profit. The sound of footsteps on wood made Cole freeze. Raymond and his men were entering the community center. Cole heard his partner's voice, calm and assured. "Spread out. Check every building. He's here somewhere, or he was recently. His car is still at the Cottonwood, and there's no way he walked out in his condition, so they knew he'd been left here, knew he'd survived. We're looking for him now." The question was why? What did Raymond want? "This place is bigger than the surveys suggested," one of the security men said. "Multiple structures." "Doesn't matter," Raymond replied. "It's all coming down anyway. Mining company wants to start operations by spring. They'll level everything, extract what they need, and move on. This little cooperative experiment will be completely erased, as it should be." Radley's father was a fool for thinking this could work. Cole's hands clenched into fists. The dogs sensed his tension and pressed closer, silent but present. Through the window, he could see men fanning out, checking buildings. One was heading toward the office where Cole hid. He looked around desperately for another exit. The back wall had a window, but it faced open ground. He'd be seen immediately if he ran. The only real option was the cabinet where he'd found the metal box. It was large enough, maybe, if he was willing to be extremely uncomfortable. Cole made a split-second decision. He gathered all the documents, including the ones he'd scattered on the desk, and shoved them back into the metal box, tucked it under his arm. Then he moved to the cabinet, which was deeper than he'd realized, less a cabinet, more a small alcove built into the thick adobe wall. He squeezed inside, pulling the door almost closed, leaving just a crack for air. The dogs didn't follow. They remained in the room, repositioning themselves casually as if they'd been there all along, lounging in the afternoon heat. The shepherd lay down directly in front of the cabinet, hiding it completely from casual view. Footsteps in the main room, then the office door opening. Cole held his breath, pressed against cool adobe, the metal box digging into his ribs. Through the crack he'd left, he could see a sliver of the room. One of Raymond's security men entered, sweeping the space with practiced efficiency. His gaze passed over the dogs without much interest. Strays were common enough out here. He checked the desk, rifled through the logbook Cole had left open, then moved toward the cabinet. The shepherd raised its head and growled, low and warning. The man stopped. "Easy there," he muttered. The dog's growl intensified. The man took a step back. "Boss, got some wild dogs in here. Might want animal control if we're coming back." Raymond's voice from nearby. "Forget it. They won't be around long anyway. Find anything useful? Just old records. Community logbook. Bunch of hippie commune nonsense. Nothing recent. Keep looking. Check the other buildings." The security man left. The shepherd's growl subsided, but the dog didn't move from its protective position. Cole waited, counting heartbeats, trying to slow his breathing. Through the wall, adobe was thick but not soundproof. He could hear Raymond and his men moving through the settlement. Occasionally voices carried, "Place is a dump. Can't believe anyone lived here. How soon can we start demolition? Survey team comes next week. After that, 6 months to clear and begin extraction. Whole operation should be done in 3 years. 3 years to completely erase what his father had built. What families had lived, what children had learned and grown and dreamed. Reduced to an empty pit in the desert, minerals extracted, profits collected, and nothing left but waste." Cole felt rage building, but it was different from the anger he'd carried for years. This wasn't the cold, calculated anger of a man who'd taught himself not to care. This was hot and righteous, the anger of someone finally understanding what matters and seeing it threatened. He waited until the voices faded, until he heard vehicles starting and driving away. Still he waited, until the sound of engines completely disappeared and silence returned to the desert. Only then did he push open the cabinet door and emerge, stiff and aching. The shepherd immediately moved to him, pressing against his leg. The other dogs gathered close. Cole sank down to sit on the floor, the metal box in his lap, overwhelmed by everything he'd learned. Raymond had betrayed him, had used him, had destroyed his father's final legacy and would have gotten away with it completely if those three men, Martinez, Santos, Rivera, hadn't decided to show Cole the truth. They'd known somehow, known about the trust, about Raymond's corruption, about what Cole had unwittingly been part of. So they'd left him here, betting that the land itself would teach him what he needed to know. And it had. With the help of 6 impossible dogs who'd saved his life and guided him through his father's history, Cole had learned, had seen, had understood, finally, what his father tried to give him. Now the question was what he could do about it. Raymond had the legal high ground, at least on paper. The forged documents had apparently passed legal scrutiny. Mining company contracts were probably signed. Cole was just one man, dehydrated and exhausted, sitting in a ruin with a box of papers that might not be enough to prove anything. But he wasn't just one man, he realized. He had proof of fraud. He had his father's original trust documents. He had evidence of Raymond's corruption. And he had something else, something he'd been missing for years: purpose. A reason to fight that had nothing to do with profit and everything to do with honoring what his father believed. Cole stood, every muscle protesting, and looked at the 6 dogs who'd saved him. "All right," he said. "Let's figure out how to stop this." The shepherd's tail wagged once. Then the dogs moved toward the door, and Cole understood. They weren't done yet. There was more to see, more to learn. His education wasn't complete. He followed them back into the desert heat, the metal box under his arm, his father's trust documents pressed against his heart. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Cole Radley felt like he was walking towards something instead of running away. The dogs led Cole away from the settlement, heading northwest across terrain that grew gradually more familiar. He'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when he recognized the landscape. He'd been here before, years ago, a lifetime ago. This was the direction of the original Radley Ranch, or what remained of it. His father had sold some peripheral parcels in the late 90s, keeping only the core property and the house. After Thomas died, Cole had sold everything without setting foot on it. Couldn't bear to, or that's what he'd told himself. More likely, he hadn't wanted to face the memories, hadn't wanted to confront the gap between who his father was and who Cole had become. Now the dogs were taking him there anyway. Cole didn't resist. At this point, resisting these animals seemed pointless. They'd saved his life, shown him truth, and protected him from Raymond's men. Whatever they wanted him to see, he'd look. The ranch house appeared as they crested a rise. Or what was left of it. The structure had collapsed in on itself, probably years ago. Adobe walls could last forever if maintained, but neglect was fatal. The roof had gone first, judging by the scatter of vigas and latillas around the perimeter. Then walls followed, melting back into the earth they'd come from, but portions remained standing. The east wall, where Cole's bedroom had been, part of the kitchen, the massive stone fireplace his great-grandfather had built, still solid after nearly a century. The porch posts, though the porch itself was gone. Enough remained to reconstruct the ghost of what had been. Cole approached slowly, each step bringing a flood of memories. Running through that door after school, sitting on that porch with his father watching storms roll in from the mountains, learning to play chess at the kitchen table, his mother's garden along the south wall, where roses had somehow thrived in the desert. All of it gone now, returned to dust, and Cole had let it happen, had actively caused it to happen by selling to people who didn't care. The dogs spread out around the ruins, noses to the ground, searching. The shepherd disappeared into what had been the main room and emerged moments later carrying something in its mouth. It brought the object to Cole and dropped it at his feet, a coffee can. Rusty, dented but sealed with a plastic lid that had somehow survived. Cole picked it up carefully and pried the lid off. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper, were envelopes, letters, maybe 20 of them, all addressed to Cole Radley at various addresses: his college apartment, his first business office, his condo in Santa Fe. None of them had been opened, because none of them had ever been sent. Cole sat down heavily on a chunk of fallen wall and began reading. The first letter was dated 3 months after his mother's funeral. "Dear Cole, I know you're angry with me, though I don't fully understand why. I know you blame me somehow for your mother's death, though I can't figure how that makes sense. A horse spooked, she fell. It was terrible and random and unfair, but it wasn't anyone's fault. I miss her every moment of every day, son. The house feels empty without her. But I have you, and that's enough. Or it should be enough. Except you're pulling away, and I don't know how to reach you. I love you. I need you to know that, even when you're angry, even when you won't talk to me. I love you, Dad. Cole's vision blurred. He'd been angry, he remembered. Furious at everything, at God, at horses, at the desert, at his father, for not preventing what couldn't be prevented. Teenage rage looking for a target, and Thomas Radley had been available. Patient and sad and available. The next letter was from Cole's first year of college. Cole, your call was good to hear, even if it was brief. I understand you're busy with studies. College is important. I'm proud of you for going, even if business school wasn't what I hoped for you. I keep thinking about the cooperative at Mesa Verde. Did I ever tell you about that project? Probably not. You weren't interested in my old-fashioned ideas, as you called them once. But maybe now, with some distance and education, you'd understand what we tried to build there. It wasn't about money, son. It was about proving people could live differently, could choose community over competition. Maybe I was naive, but I still believe it matters. Love, Dad. Letter after letter, spanning years. His father reaching out, trying to connect, expressing love and hope and gentle disappointment. Never demanding, never guilt-tripping. Just quietly offering relationship that Cole had consistently refused. The final letter was dated a month before Thomas Radley's heart attack. Cole, I'm getting older, feeling it in my bones. The ranch is too much for me now. I'm thinking of selling, which would probably make you happy since you've been suggesting it for years. But there's one piece of land I can't sell. The Mesa Verde property. I put it in a trust years ago, legal protection to preserve what we built. When I'm gone, that stewardship passes to you. I know you won't understand at first. You'll probably be angry that I've burdened you with it, as you like to say about anything that requires thinking beyond quarterly profits. But I have to believe that someday you'll see why it matters. That you'll be the man I raised you to be, the man your mother believed you could be. The trust documents are with my lawyer. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. I have faith in you, son, even if you've lost faith in yourself. Love always, Dad. Cole sat among the ruins of his childhood home, his father's unsent letters in his lap, and felt something fundamental break open inside him. All these years, he'd told himself, his father had been disappointed in him, had judged him, had found him wanting, and maybe that was partially true. But more than that, Thomas Radley had loved him, had believed in him, had trusted him with a legacy even knowing Cole might squander it. The shepherd nuzzled Cole's hand, drawing his attention. The dog was staring at something in the rubble nearby. Cole stood and went to investigate. A small metal box, similar to the one from the community center but smaller. It took some digging to free it from fallen adobe, but eventually Cole pulled it loose and forced it open. Inside was a compass. Silver, beautifully engraved, the kind of quality piece that lasted generations. It had belonged to his grandfather. Cole remembered his father showing it to him once. On the back, newly engraved in his father's familiar hand, "True north isn't a direction, it's a principle, Dad." Cole held the compass in his palm, feeling its weight. His father had prepared this for him, left it here in the ruins, knowing or hoping that someday Cole would return. True north isn't a direction, it's a principle. His father's final lesson, waiting in the wreckage of what they'd both lost. Cole stood, pocketing the compass and the letters. The metal box with the trust document sat beside him. He had evidence now, proof of Raymond's betrayal, his father's original intentions, the corruption that had nearly destroyed everything. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to get back to civilization, needed to confront Raymond, needed to act before the mining company's operations began. The dogs were moving again, heading past the ruins toward what had been the ranch's equipment barn. The building had fared better than the house. Metal roof and frame construction meant it still stood, though one wall had collapsed. Cole followed the dogs inside. His father's old truck sat exactly where Thomas must have left it, covered in dust, but seemingly intact. A 1985 Ford F-250, built like a tank, maintained with the care Thomas Radley gave everything he owned. Cole approached it uncertainly. It had been sitting here for 5 years at minimum, probably longer. No way it would start, but the dog seemed insistent. The shepherd jumped into the truck bed with easy grace. The others followed. They sat there, looking at Cole expectantly through the dirty rear window. Cole opened the driver's door. The keys were right where his father always left them, tucked in the sun visor. Thomas Radley had never worried about theft, had never locked anything if he could help it. People respect what you give them reason to respect, he'd told young Cole once. Trust breeds trust. Cole slid into the cracked leather seat and studied the dashboard. The truck was old but well maintained. His father had been meticulous about that. Oil changes, filter replacements, everything done on schedule. Maybe, just maybe, he turned the key. The engine turned over once, twice, sputtered. Cole tried again. Another sputter. He pumped the gas pedal, tried a third time. The engine caught, coughed, then settled into a rough but steady idle. Cole laughed, a sound that was half disbelief and half something close to joy. His father's truck. Still running after all these years, still ready to work when needed, like Thomas Radley himself had been. Dependable, sturdy, present. Cole let the engine warm, checking gauges. Half a tank of gas. Oil pressure looked good, temperature rising normally. Everything functioning despite years of abandonment. This was his way out. His way back to Santa Fe, to Raymond, to confronting the corruption that had nearly stolen everything. He looked at the dogs in the rearview mirror. They sat calmly, as if riding in truck beds was completely normal for feral desert strays. "All right," Cole said to them, to himself, to his father's ghost. "Let's go stop this." He put the truck in gear and eased out of the barn. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Cole oriented himself, found the dirt road that would eventually connect to paved highway, and began driving. The truck handled well, responding to his commands with the easy competence of a well-built machine. As he drove, Cole's mind worked through everything he knew. Raymond would be back in Santa Fe by now, probably confident Cole was still wandering the desert, or maybe dead. The mining company contracts were likely already signed. The demolition survey was scheduled. Time was short, maybe days, maybe less, but Cole had evidence. Had the original trust documents proving his father's intent, had correspondence showing Raymond's corruption, had the forged dissolution papers. If he could get to the right people, lawyers, judges, maybe law enforcement, he could stop this. Could prove fraud. Could protect what his father built. The question was whether anyone would believe him. Raymond had 3 years to build credibility, to position himself as the trustworthy partner. Cole was the ruthless developer, the man who'd sold his father's ranch without a second thought. Who would take his word over Raymond's? But Cole had to try, had to fight finally, for something beyond his own interests. Had to be the man his father believed he could be, the man who'd choose principle over profit. The dirt road connected to pavement as full dark fell. Cole turned north toward Santa Fe, accelerating. The old truck ran steady, eating up miles. In the rearview mirror, the 6 dogs settled down for the ride, their forms barely visible in the darkness. Guards, guides, companions, whatever they were. Cole was grateful for them. He drove through the night, planning. He'd go straight to his office, his and Raymond's office, early morning, when Raymond would be there, would confront him with the evidence, would record the conversation if possible, get Raymond to admit what he'd done, then to the police, or to lawyers, or to whoever could help him stop the destruction. It wasn't much of a plan. Raymond was smart, connected, probably already had cover stories prepared, but it was all Cole had. That and his father's trust documents. That and the compass in his pocket pointing toward true north. That and 6 dogs who'd saved his life for reasons he still didn't fully understand. Santa Fe's lights appeared on the horizon as dawn approached. Cole's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His wrists ached where the ropes had cut. His body was still recovering from exposure and dehydration, and he probably looked like a madman who'd been lost in the desert for days. which was accurate, but he was Thomas Radley's son, and he was finally, after all these years, going to prove it. Cole parked in the underground garage beneath his office building just as the city was waking up. Checked his phone, dead, of course. Checked his appearance in the mirror, terrible, but that didn't matter now. Gathered the metal box with all the documents. Opened the truck door and stood, every muscle protesting. The dogs jumped down from the truck bed and arranged themselves around him. Together, they walked toward the elevator, toward whatever confrontation waited, toward the moment when Cole Radley would finally choose his father's principles over his own profit. True north, not a direction, a principle. He pressed the button for the top floor and watched the numbers climb. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor at 6:30 in the morning. Too early for most staff, but Raymond had always been an early riser. Cole could see light under his partner's office door at the end of the hall. The dogs padded silently beside him, their claws clicking softly on polished floors that had never seen animals before. Cole didn't knock. He pushed open Raymond's door and walked in, the metal box tucked under his arm. 3 days of desert dust still coating his torn clothes. Raymond looked up from his computer, and his face went through a fascinating progression. Shock, fear, calculation, then settling into false concern. Cole, my God, we've been looking everywhere for you. Where have you been? Are you all right? Raymond stood, moving around his desk with hands extended as if to embrace him. We thought something terrible had happened. Your car was found, but you were gone. I was about to call the police. Save it, Cole said flatly. The dogs arranged themselves between him and Raymond, a living barrier. Raymond stopped, eyeing them uncertainly. What's with the animals? They saved my life. After your friends left me to die tied to a tree. Cole watched Raymond's face carefully. There, just a flicker, recognition, guilt quickly buried. I have no idea what you're talking about. Cole, you've obviously been through something traumatic. Let me call a doctor. Martinez, Santos, and Rivera, Cole continued. 3 men you paid to remove me from the equation. Only they didn't quite follow your script, did they? They wanted me to see what we were destroying, what you were destroying. What my father built. Raymond's mask slipped slightly. His voice lost some of its warmth. You're not making sense. You need medical attention. I need you to stop lying. Cole set the metal box on Raymond's desk and opened it. He pulled out the documents one by one, spreading them across the expensive wood. The original trust my father created. Your correspondence with Gerald Brewster. The forged dissolution document. All of it. Raymond looked at the papers, and Cole saw the moment calculation turned to cold assessment. His partner's face hardened. Where did you find those? Mesa Verde, the community center office. My father left them there, protected. He knew, Raymond. Knew that someday the truth would matter. That someone would need proof of what he built and what you tried to destroy. Your father was a fool, Raymond said, his voice flat now, all pretense gone. Building that cooperative fantasy. Giving away land and resources to people who contributed nothing. The property was worthless with that trust in place. I did you a favor. You forged legal documents, bribed a lawyer, stole from my father's estate. I freed the property's potential. Thomas Radley locked up 15,000 acres that could generate millions. For what? A failed commune? A handful of families who couldn't make it work anyway? Raymond moved back around his desk, putting distance between them. I saw the opportunity. I took it. And you would have thanked me if you weren't having some kind of breakdown. You used me, Cole said, his voice steady despite the anger burning in his chest. Made me the instrument of destroying my father's legacy. Counted on me being too self-absorbed to look closely at the paperwork. You were perfect, Raymond agreed. So eager to prove yourself, so desperate to show your father's philosophy was wrong. You practically begged to flip properties and maximize profits. I just pointed you in the right direction. Cole pulled out his phone. He'd borrowed a charger in the parking garage and held it up. The recording light was on. Say that again. About forging documents and stealing the property. Raymond's eyes narrowed. That won't hold up in court. One-party consent state or not, I'll have lawyers destroy you before I can what? Expose you. Stop the mining deal? Restore my father's trust? Cole stepped forward, the dogs moving with him. I'm canceling everything. The Mesa Verde deal is done. You're going to help me restore the trust, make this right, or I'm going to the police with all of this." Raymond laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You weren't supposed to make it back, partner. Those men had instructions. Leave you in the desert, let nature take its course. Nobody, no questions. Just another developer who got lost on a site visit." He shook his head. "You always were lucky." "Wrong. Naive, sentimental like your father, but lucky. You tried to have me killed." Cole felt the words settle over him, the reality of how close he'd come to death. "I tried to solve a problem. You were getting cold feet about some of our other deals, starting to ask questions. I saw the way you looked at that family we evicted in Alamogordo last month. You were going soft, becoming a liability." Raymond opened a desk drawer. "And now you walk in here with stolen documents and threats? You really think you can stop this?" The drawer produced a gun. Small, compact, but unmistakably lethal. Raymond held it casually, pointed at Cole's chest. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over those documents. You're going to delete that recording. And then you're going to sign over your share of the company and disappear. Go find yourself, have your little redemption arc, whatever. Just stay away from my business." The dogs growled, low and threatening. Raymond's hand tightened on the gun. "Call them off, Cole. I will shoot. You and those animals both." Cole stood his ground, mind racing. The recording was running. Raymond had confessed to forgery, to attempted murder. But none of that mattered if Cole was dead. He glanced at the dogs, at their tense bodies and bared teeth. They'd saved him once. Would they again? Before he could decide, Raymond's office door burst open. 2 security guards rushed in, summoned by some silent alarm Raymond must have triggered. They grabbed Cole's arms, pulling him back. One of them reached for the metal box. The shepherd moved first, a blur of fur and muscle launching itself at the guard, reaching for the documents. The man went down hard, the dog's weight and momentum overwhelming him. The other 5 dogs reacted instantly, coordinated and precise, attacking with surgical efficiency. Not killing strikes, but disabling ones, going for arms, legs, anywhere that would take the security guards down without doing permanent damage. The second guard released Cole and stumbled backward, trying to protect himself. Cole grabbed the metal box and clutched it to his chest. Raymond raised his gun, tracking between Cole and the chaos of dogs and struggling men. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed office. Cole felt the bullet pass close enough to hear its whisper. It buried itself in the wall behind him. Raymond was already adjusting his aim for a second shot when the shepherd released the guard and turned on him with a snarl that raised every hair on Cole's body. Raymond fired again, wild, missing. The dog closed the distance in 2 bounds, jaws snapping closed on Raymond's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. Raymond screamed, trying to shake the dog off. But the shepherd held firm, teeth locked, controlled pressure that stopped just short of breaking bones, but made clear it could if needed. The other dogs had the 2 guards pinned, growling warnings whenever they tried to move. One guard's hand was bleeding where teeth had found purchase. The other was simply held down by the weight of 2 dogs across his chest, unable to breathe deeply enough to fight back. Cole stood frozen, adrenaline screaming through his system. The violence had happened so fast, maybe 10 seconds from the guards, bursting into Raymond on his knees with a dog's jaws clamped around his wrist. These animals fought like they'd been trained, moving with purpose and precision that went far beyond feral instinct. Then Cole heard it. Sirens in the distance, growing closer. He'd called 911 from the parking garage before coming up, using a borrowed phone, telling them there was an emergency at this address. The dispatcher had probably thought he was crazy, rambling about fraud and attempted murder, but protocol meant they'd send someone to check. Raymond heard the sirens too, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You called the police?" "You stupid!" The dog's grip tightened and Raymond gasped, falling silent. Cole walked calmly to Raymond's desk and picked up the gun, handling it carefully, setting the safety. He'd never been comfortable with firearms, but his father had taught him basic safety. He placed it on the far corner of the desk, out of Raymond's reach, then turned his attention to his phone, still recording everything. For the record, Cole said clearly. Raymond Voss just confessed to forging legal documents, stealing property through fraudulent means, and conspiring to commit murder. He also just attempted to shoot me. All of this is recorded. All of it is witnessed by... He glanced at the two security guards. These gentlemen, who I assume had no idea what they were walking into. One guard managed a weak nod. We just work building security. We don't know anything about murder. The sirens were very close now. Cole heard vehicles pulling up outside, doors slamming, urgent voices. Within moments, police officers burst through the office door, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The dogs immediately released everyone and retreated to Cole's side, sitting calmly as if they'd never been involved in violence at all. Their transformation was so complete that Cole almost doubted what he'd just witnessed. They looked like ordinary strays now, tired and dusty, tongues lolling, almost friendly. The next 30 minutes were controlled chaos. Paramedics for Raymond's wrist and the guard's injuries. Police taking statements. Cole explaining everything while officers examined the documents from the metal box. Raymond, handcuffed and furious, shouting about lawyers and false accusations and how Cole had clearly lost his mind. But then Cole played the recording. Raymond's voice, clear and damning, admitting to forgery, to conspiracy, to attempted murder. The office fell silent as everyone listened. Even Raymond stopped protesting, his face going pale as he heard his own words condemning him. These documents appear legitimate, one officer said, examining the trust papers and the correspondence. We'll need forensic analysis of the signatures, but if this dissolution is forged, as you claim, he looked at Raymond, you're looking at serious charges. Fraud, forgery, potentially attempted murder, if we can prove you hired those men. Martinez, Santos, and Rivera, Cole provided. They'll testify. They were paid to leave me in the desert, but they had a change of heart. Wanted me to see what was being destroyed instead. Raymond's eyes burned with hatred. Your father was a fool, Cole. That land is worthless without development. Everything he built there failed. Failed because his philosophy was wrong. Cooperation doesn't work. Community doesn't pay. Only profit matters, only strength. I was trying to teach you that. Make something useful out of you. Cole looked at his former partner, this man he'd trusted, worked with, considered almost a friend, and felt only pity. You're wrong, Raymond. You've always been wrong. My father understood what you never could. Wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in what you build that lasts after you're gone. In relationships. In community. In principle. Principles don't pay rent, Raymond spat. No, Cole agreed. But they let you sleep at night. They let you look at yourself in the mirror. They let you be worth something beyond your bank account. He turned to the police officers. I have everything you need. Documents, recordings, locations. I'll testify to whatever you need. They led Raymond away, still protesting, still insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that his lawyers would destroy everyone involved. The security guards were taken for medical treatment and statements. Crime scene investigators began photographing everything, documenting the office, collecting the gun, processing evidence. Cole sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. 3 days without proper food or sleep, his body still recovering from exposure, adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical weight. One of the officers brought him water and an energy bar from a vending machine. Cole drank gratefully. The 6 dogs lay around him, forming their protective circle one more time. In the fluorescent office lighting, Cole noticed something he'd missed before in the desert darkness and dawn dimness. Each dog wore a collar, faded, worn, barely visible beneath matted fur. He reached out to the shepherd, gently moving fur aside to see better, a name tag, weathered but still legible. Ranger, property of T. Radley. Cole's breath caught. He checked the other dogs one by one. Each had a similar tag. Scout, property of T. Radley. Bear, property of T. Radley. Names his father would have chosen. Working dog names. Ranch dog names, but these dogs were too young to have been his father's. Thomas Radley had been dead 5 years. Unless... Cole looked into the shepherd's amber eyes and saw that impossible intelligence again. These weren't just dogs. Couldn't be. The way they'd known where to go, what to show him, how to fight. The way they'd led him through his father's history with perfect purpose. The way their collars bore his father's name, but their ages made no sense. "What are you?" Jane Cole whispered. The shepherd tilted its head, and for just a moment Cole could have sworn he saw his father looking back at him through those eyes. Then the dog yawned, stretched, and settled down to sleep as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Magic or miracle, ghost or guardian, it didn't matter. They'd saved him, taught him, brought him home to himself. That was enough. 6 months later, Cole Radley stood on the same rise where the dogs had first shown him the settlement, watching the sun rise over Mesa Verde. But the view had changed dramatically. Where ruins had stood, renewed buildings now gleamed with fresh adobe and new roofs. Where emptiness had reigned, people moved with purpose and hope. The legal battle had been shorter than expected. Raymond's recorded confession, combined with the forensic evidence of forged documents, had made the case straightforward. He'd pleaded guilty to avoid trial, accepting a 10-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. The corrupt lawyer, Gerald Brewster, had lost his license and faced his own criminal charges. The mining company, facing public relations disaster when the story broke, had quietly withdrawn from the deal and apologized for not conducting proper due diligence. The trust was restored within 3 months, with Cole named as steward under his father's original terms. But Cole had gone further. He'd used his own wealth, earned from years of development work he now regretted, to expand the trust and begin restoration. Every property he'd flipped, every family he'd displaced, he couldn't undo those harms. But he could honor his father's vision going forward, could try to build something that mattered. The first families to return had been Martinez, Santos, and Rivera. The 3 men who'd tied Cole to a tree and saved his life by forcing him to see truth. They'd brought their children and grandchildren, drawn back to land they'd never stopped loving. Others followed, descendants of original cooperative members, new families looking for a different way of living. People who believed in Thomas Radley's dream of community over competition. Now, 40 families called Mesa Verde home again. The homesteads were rebuilt or restored, each family contributing labor and receiving support from the collective. The community center hosted meetings 3 times a week, where decisions were made democratically, where conflicts were resolved through discussion rather than decree. The schoolhouse had a new roof and 15 students, with a teacher who'd left a career in Santa Fe to be part of something meaningful. Cole himself lived in a modest adobe house he'd built with his own hands, guided by Martinez and the others who remembered how it was done. It wasn't fancy. 1 bedroom, a kitchen, a living area, a porch where he could watch the desert change colors at twilight. He'd sold his condo, his luxury cars, everything that spoke to the man he'd been, kept only what he needed to live simply and work hard. He'd stepped away from the development business entirely, liquidating his share and using the proceeds to fund the cooperative. Some people called him crazy. Others said he'd had a breakdown. A few understood that he'd actually woken up. Maria Elena Santos's great-niece had been one of the first to return, bringing her husband and 3 children. She'd sought Cole out the first week, and they'd walked together to the cemetery where Cole had broken down months before. She told him stories about Maria Elena, her kindness, her strength, her absolute faith that people could be better than their worst impulses. "She talked about you," the niece had said. "Even after she left your father's employment. She said you were lost, but not beyond finding. That you had your father's heart, just buried deep. I think she'd be happy to know she was right." Cole visited that grave often now, leaving flowers, sitting in quiet contemplation. But today was different. Today was special. The dogs padded up beside him, as they always did. They'd stayed with him through everything. The legal proceedings, the rebuilding, the gradual transformation of Mesa Verde from ruin to renewal. They roamed during the day, but always returned to sleep on his porch at night. The community had adopted them as mascots of sorts, though the children had learned to be respectful. These weren't pets. They were something else entirely. An elder, one of the original cooperative members who'd returned at age 78, had told Cole a story last month about Thomas Radley's working dogs in the 1960s and 70s. 6 of them, loyal and smart, who'd helped build the cooperative and watched over the families. When they died, one by one over the years, Thomas had buried them with ceremony near the cemetery, saying they'd earned rest among the humans they'd served. But some of us believed they never really left, the elder had said, that their spirits stayed, protecting what your father built. Dogs can do that, you know, choose to stay if the cause matters enough. Or maybe they're not spirits at all. Maybe they're just descended from those original 6 carrying on their work. Either way, they saved you for a reason, Cole. Led you home. Cole didn't know what to believe. Magic or genetics, spirits or coincidence, it didn't really matter. They'd saved his life and taught him what mattered. That was miracle enough. Behind him, the community bell began to ring. The same bronze bell from the schoolhouse, cleaned and remounted and ringing again after decades of silence. It called families to gather for the morning meal, a tradition the cooperative had revived, communal breakfast 3 times a week, where everyone contributed and everyone belonged. Cole turned and walked down the rise toward the gathering. Children ran past him, laughing, heading for the community center. Gardens sprawled around every homestead now, green against the desert browns, fed by a restored irrigation system and careful water management. Solar panels provided power. Chickens ranged freely. The place hummed with life, with purpose, with the particular energy that comes from people working together towards shared goals. At the community center, Cole found his place at one of the long tables. Martinez sat across from him, Santos to his left, Rivera beside his daughter and grandchildren. Conversations flowed in English and Spanish, jokes and news and plans for the day's work. Someone was installing new windows in the homestead on the north edge. Someone else needed help with a stubborn tractor. A work crew would clear brush to reduce fire danger. Everything decided collectively, labor shared fairly, success benefiting everyone. After breakfast, Cole walked to his father's grave. Not the cemetery at Mesa Verde. Thomas Radley was buried in town, in the family plot beside Cole's mother. But Cole had placed a marker here too, a memorial stone near the cooperative cemetery. Thomas Radley, 1943-2020. He showed us the way. The 6 dogs accompanied him as always. They sat while Cole knelt and placed fresh flowers, wild flowers from the desert, the kind his father had loved. Cole pulled the silver compass from his pocket, the one he carried everywhere now, and held it in his palm. "I found true north, Dad," he said quietly. "Took me long enough. Took getting lost in the desert and nearly dying and seeing everything you built. Took being saved by dogs who maybe were or weren't really dogs. But I found it. I understand now what you tried to teach me. That wealth isn't measured in what you take, but in what you give. That home isn't a place, it's people choosing to build something together. That legacy matters more than profit." The wind moved through the sage, carrying the scent of desert flowers and growing things. Somewhere in the settlement, children laughed. A hammer rang against metal. Someone called out a greeting. Life, continuing, building, becoming. "I'm sorry it took so long," Cole continued. "Sorry I wasted years running from everything you valued. But I'm here now. I'm home. And I promise you, I'll guard what you built. I'll honor what you believed. For however long I have, this place will be protected. Your dream lives, Dad. It lives." The shepherd pressed against Cole's leg, warm and solid. The other 5 dogs formed their familiar circle, watching over him, as they'd done since that first night in the ruins. Guardians and guides, companions and teachers, whatever they truly were. Cole stood, pocketing the compass, and turned back toward the settlement. The bell was ringing again, calling people to a meeting. Democratic decision-making in action. He needed to be there, needed to participate, needed to be part of the community rather than above it. That was the lesson, ultimately, not to lead from wealth or power, but to serve from principle and love. As he walked, the dogs spread out around him. Children waved from their play, adults called greetings, the sun climbed higher, warming the desert, blessing the land and the people who'd chosen to make it home. And Cole Radley, finally, after so many lost years, knew exactly where he belonged. Sometimes those we've wronged become our only hope for salvation. Sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected places. And sometimes it takes a pack of dogs to lead us home.